Long, long ago, before any settlers came from far-off lands, the Modoc people lived in a beautiful place. This land was their home, a place they knew better than anyone. They lived near a big lake and rivers that sparkled in the sun. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the Modoc walked these lands, generation after generation. Their lives were tied to the rhythm of nature. They were masters of hunting. With bows and arrows, they hunted deer and other animals that roamed the forests and plains. They knew exactly where to find them and how to use every part of the animal so nothing was wasted. But hunting was only part of their special skills. The Modoc were also amazing at fishing. The lakes and rivers were full of fish, especially salmon. They would catch these fish using nets and spears, providing plenty of food for their families and tribe. The women would gather berries, roots, and other plants that grew wild, adding even more to their meals. They knew which plants were good to eat and which ones to avoid. Their homes were made from reeds and wood, warm in winter and cool in summer. They told stories around crackling fires, teaching their children about their ancestors and the ways of their land. Every rock, every tree, every stream held a special meaning for them. This was not just a place they lived. It was a part of who they were. They were happy, strong, and deeply connected to their ancestral home. Life for the Modoc people was peaceful and full of purpose, centered on their ancient ways. But then, changes began to ripple through their world, like stones dropped into a calm lake. People from faraway lands, whom the Modoc called white settlers, started to appear. At first, there were only a few, curious and looking for new places to live. But soon, more and more came, bringing their wagons, their tools, and their different ways of seeing the land. These settlers did not understand the Modoc's deep connection to every part of their home. They saw the vast plains, the rich forests, and the sparkling rivers as empty land, just waiting to be claimed. They wanted to build farms, raise animals, and dig for gold. To them, the Modoc's hunting grounds were just open spaces, and the fishing rivers were simply resources to take. As more settlers arrived, they started to build their homes and fences right on Modoc land. This made it very hard for the Modoc to hunt and fish in the places they had always known. The deer were scared away, and the fish became harder to catch. The settlers' animals ate the plants the Modoc gathered. It felt like their world was shrinking, day by day. The Modoc tried to live peacefully alongside the newcomers, but it was difficult. The settlers did not always respect the Modoc's traditions or their ownership of the land. Tensions grew, and fear began to mix with the Modoc's sadness. Their happy, connected life was being threatened by these new people who simply wanted the land for themselves. The Modoc watched their land shrink and their way of life slowly disappear as more and more settlers arrived. It was a time of great worry and sadness. Then, something even more difficult happened. The big government, far away, made a decision about the Modoc people. They said the Modoc could no longer live on their own lands. Instead, they had to move to a special place called a reservation. But it wasn't just any reservation. The government wanted the Modoc to live on the same reservation as another tribe, the Klamath. This news hit the Modoc like a cold wind. The Modoc and the Klamath tribes had been neighbors for a very long time, but they were not friends. In fact, they often had disagreements and even fought. They had different customs and different ways of doing things. Asking them to live together was like asking two cats to share one small basket. It was sure to cause problems. The Modoc felt a deep ache in their hearts. Not only were they being forced to leave their beloved homeland, the place where their ancestors were buried and their stories lived, but they were also being forced to live with people they didn't trust. They would have to share resources, hunting grounds, and even space with a tribe they had long been at odds with. This made the Modoc people very sad and very angry. They felt like they were being pushed around, their feelings and their history not mattering to the government. They wanted to stay on their own land, with their own people living their own way. But the government's word felt like a heavy stone, crushing their hopes. The idea of living with the Klamath made their future seem even darker. Living on the Klamath Reservation was even worse than the Modoc had feared. The Klamath, being the larger tribe, often treated the Modoc unfairly, taking their food and making their lives miserable. The Modoc felt trapped, their spirits sinking lower each day. They longed for their true home, for the freedom to hunt and fish as they always had, without fear or unfairness. During this hard time, a strong and wise Modoc leader named Kintpuash stepped forward. The white settlers knew him by another name, Captain Jack. He had a brave heart and a deep love for his people. He saw their sadness, their hunger, and the way they were treated. He knew in his heart that this was not how his people were meant to live. Captain Jack gathered his people. He spoke with a clear, steady voice, telling them that they could not stay on the Klamath Reservation any longer. He declared that they would leave this place of unhappiness and go back to their old home, to the familiar lands near Tule Lake. It was a risky decision, a dangerous one, but it was also a decision filled with hope. His message was simple but powerful. His people deserved to be free. They deserved to live on their own land, in their own way, just as their ancestors had. Captain Jack wanted his people to hold their heads high, to live with dignity and peace. He was ready to lead them back to where they belonged, even if it meant facing great challenges. The Modoc people, tired of being mistreated, looked to Captain Jack with renewed hope, ready to follow their brave leader towards freedom. Captain Jack led his people back to their cherished lands near Tule Lake. They felt a sense of relief and happiness to be home, even knowing that trouble might follow. And trouble soon did. The government did not like that the Modoc had left the reservation. They sent a message: the Modoc must go back. But Captain Jack and his people had already suffered too much. They refused. They were ready to stand their ground. To make them go back, the U.S. Army was called. Soldiers, dressed in their blue uniforms, marched toward the Modoc camp. They arrived near a place called Lost River, where the Modoc had made their new homes. It was a cold, misty morning. The air was tense, heavy with fear and anger. The soldiers wanted to take the Modoc warriors, guns, and force everyone to return to the reservation. But the Modoc warriors, though few in number, were determined. They would not give up their freedom so easily. Words were exchanged, harsh and unyielding. Then a shot rang out. No one knows for sure who fired first, but the sound echoed, marking the start of a terrible battle. A big fight broke out. The Modoc warriors, fighting for their homes and families, bravely defended themselves. The soldiers, with more men and more powerful weapons, pushed forward. The sounds of gunfire filled the air. Families scrambled for safety while the warriors fought with all their might. It was a fierce and heartbreaking struggle at Lost River, a fight for survival and the right to be free on their own land. After the terrible fight at Lost River, Captain Jack knew his small group of Modoc warriors, along with their women and children, could not stay out in the open. The U.S. Army was much bigger and stronger. They needed a place where they could be safe, a place that would help them fight back. Captain Jack remembered a very special area in their ancestral lands. He led his people to a place that looked like a rough, broken landscape, full of strange rocks and deep holes. This was the lava beds. It was a wild, confusing place formed long ago by fiery lava flowing from volcanoes. It was like no other place on Earth. The ground was uneven, with sharp, jagged rocks sticking up everywhere. There were cracks in the earth that led to hidden tunnels and dark caves. This rugged land became their perfect hiding spot. For Captain Jack and his brave warriors, only about 50 of them, the lava beds were like a giant, natural fort. The caves offered shelter from the cold and from enemy eyes. The endless maze of rocks and ridges provided countless places to hide and watch without being seen. They could move through the rocky pathways, knowing every twist and turn, while outsiders would easily get lost. The Modoc knew this land intimately. They had explored its secrets since they were children. Now, this knowledge was their greatest weapon. They settled into the lava beds, preparing to defend their freedom from this amazing, rocky fortress. Settled in their amazing natural fort, the Modoc warriors prepared for the inevitable arrival of the U.S. Army. These warriors were not just brave, they were incredibly smart fighters. Their greatest advantage was their perfect knowledge of the lava beds. Every hidden path, every deep crevice, every tall rock formation was like a familiar friend to them. They had grown up playing and hunting in this very landscape, learning its secrets from childhood. When the soldiers finally came, they found themselves in a confusing and dangerous maze. The lava beds were a nightmare for anyone who didn't know them well. The soldiers, used to fighting on open fields, struggled to move through the rough, uneven terrain. They couldn't see where the Modoc were hiding, but the Modoc warriors could see the soldiers. They used the rocks and caves like invisible shields. A warrior might pop up from behind a jagged rock, fire a shot, and then disappear back into the shadows before the soldiers even knew where the shot came from. They would crawl through hidden tunnels, appearing in unexpected places, confusing and scaring the much larger army. It was like a game of hide and seek, but with very real danger. The Modoc knew where every good hiding spot was, where to set traps, and how to move silently. They used the misty mornings and dark nights to their advantage, making daring movements. Their cleverness and deep understanding of their land turned their small numbers into a powerful force, making them very hard to defeat. The Modoc's clever fighting in the lava beds quickly showed the U.S. Army that this would not be an easy fight. The small group of about 50 Modoc warriors was proving to be a huge problem. The Army leaders were surprised and frustrated. They couldn't believe such a small number of people could hold off so many trained soldiers. To solve this, the U.S. Army decided to send even more soldiers. They gathered hundreds of men, far more than the Modoc had. These soldiers came with many more energy devices, bigger cannons, and plenty of supplies. They thought that with such a large force they could easily overwhelm the Modoc and force them to surrender. But the Modoc warriors, despite seeing the huge number of soldiers gathering against them, did not lose heart. They were very brave. Each warrior knew they were fighting for their families, for their freedom, and for their homeland. They knew the odds were against them, but their spirit was strong. They refused to give up. The army's numbers grew to several hundred, perhaps even 1,000 soldiers, all surrounding the lava beds. It was like a giant wave crashing against a small but incredibly tough rock. The soldiers had all the advantages of equipment and manpower. Yet the Modoc warriors, with their courage and deep knowledge of their rocky fort, prepared to face this enormous challenge, ready to fight for every inch of their freedom. With hundreds of soldiers surrounding them, the Modoc began an incredible fight that lasted not just days or weeks, but many months. The cold winds of winter blew, bringing snow and icy rain, but the Modoc warriors held strong in their rocky fortress. They faced the constant pressure of the U.S. Army, yet they never gave up. Every day the Modoc showed amazing courage. They were so few, maybe 50 warriors, but they faced an army that was 10 or even 20 times their size. Despite being outnumbered, they fought with fierce determination. They were fighting for everything they held dear, their families, their culture, and their right to live freely on their own land. Their skill was just as impressive as their bravery. They used every rock and every shadow of the lava beds to their advantage. They moved like ghosts through the rugged terrain, appearing when least expected and disappearing just as quickly. They knew how to aim their shots carefully, making every bullet count. The soldiers, on the other hand, often fired blindly into the maze of rocks, wasting their ammunition. The Modoc's ability to defend themselves against such a massive force astonished everyone. They made the U.S. Army look foolish at times, unable to catch or defeat the small band of warriors. Through the long, cold months, the Modoc proved that courage, skill, and a deep love for one's home could stand against great power, even when the odds seemed impossible. Even with their amazing courage and skill, the Modoc warriors couldn't fight forever without a break. After months of battle, both sides were tired. The U.S. Army, frustrated by their inability to defeat the small Modoc force, suggested a meeting to talk about peace. Captain Jack and some of his trusted Modoc leaders agreed, hoping to find a way to end the fighting and keep their people safe. They met in a tent set up between the two fighting lines. It was supposed to be a place of talk where no one would be harmed. But something terrible happened. During the meeting, an argument broke out. Then, without warning, the peace talks turned into a tragedy. Some of the U.S. Army officers, angry and desperate, attacked the Modoc leaders. Sadly, Captain Jack's friend and important Modoc leader, General Canby, and another man were killed right there in the tent. This was a terrible shock. The Modoc leaders had come in good faith, believing they were safe to talk. This act of betrayal deeply wounded the Modoc people. News of what happened spread quickly through the lava beds. The Modoc were filled with great sadness and a burning anger. Losing their leaders in such a deceitful way was a heavy blow. It hurt their fighting spirit, making them feel like they couldn't trust anyone. The hope for peace was shattered, replaced by grief and a renewed sense of despair. They knew their fight had become even harder, but they still had to go on. The Modoc people tried to continue their fight after the terrible betrayal at the peace tent, but their spirits were heavy. The loss of their leaders and the broken trust made it even harder to stay strong. They had fought for many, many long months, outsmarting and outfighting an army much larger than themselves. But even the bravest warriors get tired, and their supplies started to run low. The U.S. Army, learning from their mistakes, changed their tactics. They brought in more and more soldiers, cutting off the Modocs' ways to get food and water. The lava beds, once a perfect hiding place, started to feel like a trap. The Modoc warriors, with their families to protect, knew they couldn't keep fighting forever. Their numbers were so small, and the armies was so vast. One by one, some of Captain Jack's warriors and their families, hungry and exhausted, started to surrender. They knew their incredible stand was nearing its end. Finally, after many incredibly brave and difficult months, Captain Jack and his last remaining warriors were also captured. It was a sad day. They had fought with all their might, showing courage that few armies could ever match. They had held off hundreds of soldiers with just a handful of warriors, using their smarts and knowledge of the land. But even great bravery cannot win against endless numbers and time. Their amazing fight had come to an end, not because they gave up their spirit, but because the odds were simply too great. The capture of Captain Jack and his warriors marked a somber end to their incredible resistance. The Modoc had fought with unmatched bravery, but now they were prisoners. The U.S. government decided that some of the Modoc leaders, including Captain Jack, must be punished for their actions during the war, especially for the deaths that occurred during the peace talks. A trial was held for Captain Jack and several other Modoc leaders. They were accused of terrible crimes. Even though they had fought to protect their homes and their people, and even though they had been betrayed during the peace talks, the government saw them as rebels and murderers. Many people felt that the trial was not fair, as the Modoc leaders had little chance to truly explain their side of the story or the reasons for their fight. In the end, Captain Jack and 3 other Modoc leaders were found guilty. The punishment was very harsh. On a sad autumn day, Captain Jack, along with Black Jim, Boston Charlie, and Shanshan John, were hanged. This was a heartbreaking and very sad end to their brave fight for freedom. Captain Jack, who had led his people with such courage and determination, met a tragic fate. For the Modoc people, it was a profound loss, a moment of deep grief and despair. Their hope for living freely on their ancestral lands was crushed, and the lives of their respected leaders were taken away. It was a harsh reminder of the power of the government and the terrible cost of war. With their brave leader, Captain Jack, and other Modoc leaders gone and their spirit deeply wounded, the remaining Modoc people faced an even harsher fate. The U.S. government made another decision that changed their lives forever. They would not be allowed to return to their ancestral lands, nor would they be sent back to the Klamath Reservation. Instead, they were to be moved far, far away. The surviving Modoc men, women, and children were gathered and forced onto wagons and trains. They were taken on a long, hard journey across many states, away from everything they had ever known. Their destination was a new reservation, thousands of miles from their beloved Tule Lake, in a place called Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. This move was incredibly difficult. The new land was very different from their old home. The plants were unfamiliar, the animals were different, and the climate was strange. They lost their deep connection to the land that had shaped their stories, their hunting grounds, and their spiritual beliefs. They also lost many of their customs and their unique way of life. They were forced to adapt to a new world, surrounded by other tribes who also had been moved there. The Modoc people carried immense sadness and loss with them. They had lost their homeland, the graves of their ancestors, and the freedom they had fought so bravely to protect. Their vibrant culture and traditions were suppressed. It was a complete uprooting, leaving them with heavy hearts and a challenging future in a strange new place. The Modoc War, though ending in heartbreak and loss for the Modoc people, remains a powerful story. It teaches us a very important lesson: how brave a small group of people can be when they stand up for what they deeply believe in. Just 50 Modoc warriors, with their families, managed to hold off hundreds of U.S. Army soldiers for many months. This was an amazing feat, showing incredible courage and cleverness. Their fight was not just for land, it was for fairness and freedom. They wanted the right to live in peace on their ancestral home, to practice their traditions, and to raise their children in the ways they knew. They did not want to be forced onto a reservation with a rival tribe, or to have their lands taken away by settlers. The Modoc War reminds us that every person, every tribe, deserves to be treated with respect and fairness. It shows us how important it is for people to have the freedom to choose where and how they live. Even though the Modoc lost their physical fight, their spirit of resistance and their unwavering belief in their rights shine through history. This story makes us think about what it truly means to be free and what people are willing to do to protect that freedom. It is a sad story in many ways, but it is also a story of extraordinary bravery and a call for us to remember the importance of justice for all people. The Modoc War will always be a reminder of a time when a small band of warriors stood tall against a giant, fighting with all their heart for their sacred home and their liberty.